Okay, in this video I'm going to talk about indifference curves. I'll be a little more brief than I was in the notes, but I wanted to give you a visual for those of you who want me to walk you through it. Okay, so indifference curves, we can call them IC, for indifference curve, for this class. And so these are a way to represent our preferences. Okay, so let me draw a few and then I'll show you a couple things about them. Okay, so we usually label them. So like, okay, so here's market, here's home, and this is nothing to do with production. This is what you like. Okay, so these are our preferences. Let me draw one more here. And so we usually label them, so we can label them with the I and just number them. Okay, so then we know. So these are each different indifference curves. And there's first thing to know about them. If we put like a point A and point B, the utility, that means how much satisfaction you get from A, is the same as the satisfaction you get from B. So that's the first thing. Along the same line, equal utility, right? If you go along the same line, then people like them the same. Okay, that's the first thing. Second thing, so along the same indifference curve, you have the same satisfaction. That's the first thing. Second thing, let's call this one C. Okay, higher indifference curve, more satisfaction. So the utility this person gets from C is greater from the utility they get from A or utility they get from B. A and B are the same, right? So we represent, so this indifference curve represents graphically this idea of how much do you like things. So along the curve, you like those the same. So this is like, A is like a lot of market goods and a little bit of home, and B is a lot more home but a lot less market, right? So they like those the same, whatever numbers they are. I didn't bother to put any numbers on them here. And then C is, C, they like it better. Well, it's easy to see why they like C better. C has more of both. And it doesn't always have more of both in every case, but it definitely will have where the higher indifference curve, you get compensated for your loss if you have less of something. Okay, so this is the first thing. So graphically, when we look at these, it has these two parts, that the utility along the line is the same, and the higher you go to the right, the more utility you get. And then the third thing is we can see the trade-off. So let's say we go from C to point D. Okay, so you're giving up some market goods and you're getting some home, right? So then this slope represents the willingness to trade off. Okay, so that's the third thing we can get. So the slope represents willingness to trade off. So in this case, you're giving, in one case, they're to trade off or substitute. Okay, the two goods. So they're giving up a certain amount to go from C to D. They're giving up a certain amount of market goods and they're getting a certain amount of home goods, right? And it's in like this ratio here. So we can continue with that. Let's just draw you two more real quick. Okay, so and so this is called the marginal rate of substitution, is what it's called. And you can check out the notes to see how to write that. But marginal rate of substitution. Okay, so I'm going to draw two extreme examples. So I0, I1. Okay, so we have these two different examples. And so in one case, the lines are very flat. Okay, so we said this earlier. So in this case, if you're trading off market goods for home, you're going to get a lot of home just for a little bit of market. Okay, so, and then in this case, you're going to give up a lot of market to get some home. Okay, so we can say something about these two. So this one, the first one, relatively likes the market goods. Okay, so they like market goods. So they're only willing to trade off. This seems a little counterintuitive because they're getting a lot of home. You might say, well, but they're only willing to trade off market goods if you give them lots of home goods. So that means they like the market goods more, right? So I'm only willing to give up my slice of pizza if you give me a whole bunch of hamburgers, okay? So that's because I really like pizza, right? So that's the idea we got here. So the thing you're willing to, the thing you want a lot of, the other thing in trade for it, you like it. And so then on this other side, this other person relatively likes home goods because they're willing to give up lots of market to get not so much home, right? So the ratio is such that they relatively like home goods. Now, there's one thing that we've done here that's not so realistic. Okay, there's one thing we've done here that's not so realistic, and that is our lines are all straight. So if the straight, the straight line, right? Straight line means our constant rate of substitution. But that might not be very realistic because just to give a different good instead of maybe this one, you can just imagine you got all of one thing and nothing of the other. So maybe your two goods are you can have a coffee and you can have something to eat with it, like a pastry. Okay, and so those are the two goods that you have options of, and so your preference for those things. And assuming you don't hate pastries or hate coffee, if you hate coffee, substitute something else in there. But assuming you like both things, you would probably rather have like a cup of coffee and a pastry to go with it than to be offered like 3 cups of coffee and no pastry, or 4 pastries and nothing to drink, right? So you probably like these combinations in the middle a little bit more. And so you actually care about the ratio, and the straight line assumes you don't care about the ratio. You're just willing to trade them directly, right? So the more realistic case, and this is the case we're going to use in this class, is the more realistic case is just this. And again, these are indifference curves. They are not PPFs. So these are about what you like. More realistic is to have a curve. And so what does the curve tell you? So the curve tells you that how much you're willing to trade off depends on how much you have. So the curve, so first of all, you like in combination. You also like them alone, but you like them in combination even better. And then the second thing is the good that is more scarce becomes more valuable. It's more scarce for you, it becomes more valuable. So if it's more scarce to you, it's more valuable to you. Let me show that on the graph, and then we'll take a break before we do the next video. So if we look on this line, up here you have tons of market, no home, very little home, and your trade-off, you're willing to trade off tons of market for a tiny bit of home. But when you get down here to the other end, you have lots of home and very little market. Now you're no longer willing to do this trade. Now to give up even more market, even a tiny bit more market, you would require a huge amount of home to compensate you. Okay, so this ratio changes depending on which one is more scarce, and that's the meaning of this curve. So the other parts are still the same. It's still along the same line. It's the same happiness, same satisfaction, utility, and the higher lines is more, and the slope still tells you about the trade-off. Now it's just the trade-off changes as you reach different zones of scarcity.